So in this lecture now we're going to begin to talk about the basic setup of how a redox reaction occurs in aqueous solution, or this is the overview of a voltaic cell. Um, so here we're going to consider the oxidation of nickel by lead, and you're given two reduction potentials, one for lead 2 and the other one for nickel 2. So if you take lead, which is an aqueous ion, when paired with the appropriate anion, and it takes 2 electrons, right? Remember, electrons are a reactant for reduction, and this will give lead 0 as a solid product. And that's said to have a potential of negative 0.13 volts, which tells us about the energy transferred per charge or coulomb. So the nickel half reaction for reduction would be the nickel 2 aqueous ion, also accepting 2 electrons, to become nickel 0, which is in its solid metallic elemental form. And that reduction potential is given as negative 0.26 volts.